Yeah, thanks for that. The reason I kind of popped up in the chat once there to say we're going to talk a bit more about homelessness and things here is because I'm mostly going to focus on housing activism, evictions, and the coming crisis here. So it'd be great to hear people's thoughts on that. But basically, I wanted to start by saying that I think we should think back to the last crisis. I think a lot of us are thinking about all the job losses that are happening now and due to happen, but unemployment and homelessness go hand in hand, as Ozzy said. Following a wave of people losing their incomes, people often then lose their homes or lose the home that they're in, so they might end up in worse accommodation or cheaper accommodation elsewhere, or not end up in accommodation at all and end up homeless. We have, of course, seen a massive spike in homelessness, a historic spike since the last recession in 2008. You can see all the stats and graphs are out there for how repossessions of people's houses who had mortgages and evictions massively spiked following that crisis over a period of a year and a half, 2 years, as the system sorted out their punishments. And I think because of that, we have to be very aware that we are facing, this is another part of the crisis that we are about to face. As socialists, historically, we've often wanted to focus on workplace struggles as the point of production, but more so than ever, the housing sector is the point of profit making for a very large number of capitalists. And more than ever, the housing sector is one of the most expensive parts of most people's lives, and therefore the thing that gets affected most when if they lose their jobs or part of their income. So we have to also recognise that income is tied to benefits for those who don't have jobs or are losing their jobs, and that universal credit is a historically bad benefit system in terms of how little it gives people and how many sanctions punishments there are involved in that system. So we are going to see, unfortunately, in this crisis, a real spike in homelessness and poverty. So I just wanted to quickly mention social reproduction theory. So as Marxists trying to theorize the total system, we know that when capitalists have crises, they try and force their crises on us. They try and privatize their crises so that they don't lose as much. They have the power to do this in many cases. So effectively, they give us their crisis by forcing us to go and reproduce ourselves for free, or at a lower rate, at a lower level, using less money and less resources than we would have had before. Given that this follows a decade of austerity where we're already doing a lot of our own care and reproduction, more so than we were before, it is a new stage of that we have to be aware will potentially be even worse. So less pessimistically, I want to think mostly about resistance to that, and how we can sort of fight back. So particularly looking at housing activism, I think one of the really great things over the last 2 or 3 years has been the massive expansion in tenants unions and community unions and their activity. So Acorn, the union, only set up in the UK about 4 years ago, 5 years ago now probably. But since then it has gained 4,000 members. So it's growing extremely rapidly as it gains traction. The last 6 months have been one of the most rapid growth periods in the history of Acorn. And Acorn as a union, it's across the UK, but there's also other tenants unions, London Renters Union, Living Rent in Scotland, Tenants Union UK, and they're all growing and attempting to do the same sort of things. And I think it's really heartening that those are the places where struggle is happening around housing right now in a lot of the tenant sector, because it's actually fighting back on our own terms. So unlike an anti-austerity movement that just asks for more from the government, this is actually just trying to make it happen ourselves, which I think builds working class confidence much more during a time of Tory rule than just asking for things you're not going to get would. So in terms of what we're doing, I think, and this is true of all those unions I mentioned, but in terms of what Acorn's doing, so they're preparing for the wave of potential evictions by training up very large numbers of people in each branch in eviction resistance, which involves peacefully but stubbornly resisting evictions of your members. So if someone says they're going to be evicted, you turn out in person and resist in numbers. It also involves, before you get to that point, fighting landlords who are trying to evict people. So I was involved in a case last year, which was a really nice win, but they were served a legal eviction notice. So I just want to make the distinction between different types of eviction notice. The legal eviction notice was a Section 21, which is the no fault eviction. They don't even have to tell you why you're being kicked out, but they give you 2 months. And she was served a Section 21, and she had to just get out. But ACORN managed to put some pressure on the estate agent and the landlord to stop them from doing that, and she stayed in her home. So there are lots of instances like that, which I think before it even gets to eviction stage, where casework and pressure can win. And because it's a very scalable model, I think it's a really positive one to be involved in, because effectively all that ACORN branches share are their tactics. Broadly, they share some politics, because of course we're trying to resist evictions, but more than that, they share tactics. So that means that any group can be trained up in the tactics of eviction resistance and get on it straight away. So in that sense, I think it's really great to see the growth of tenants unions in this model, which is much more hands-on, practical and direct action based. What I would say, however, is that once it has scaled, it will face government resistance and capitalist resistance more than it has so far. So landlords do have landlord associations, they have, you know, whole apparatuses around them to stop you from doing this sort of thing, but they haven't had to be in action for many years. So the bigger we get, the more they will start to organise against us, and I think that's something which we have to bear in mind and work out how to resist. I would also raise one more question about tenants unions. I think we've heard Will and Willie and others mention the union bureaucracies in work in the Unite and other large unions. I think we have to be careful about scalability in tenants activism, turning them into like NGOs with bureaucracies, because it's that because their shared basis is tactics and not politics, and there isn't much political discussion. Because of that, it feels like we do need to work out how to build the rank and file in those organizations, so that you're building class power and class consciousness, as well as tactical wins, because otherwise people could come in and out of that area and not really be in a much more organizer kind of place. They might just be mobilized for a particular action and then leave and not have that kind of desire to or ability to do more because of their learning, collective learning, which I think is what I'd like to see more of there. So I've talked about ACORN, but I think there are loads of different organizations that can play a role in this, and it's not just about evictions, it's also about repossessions, it's also about sort of homelessness services, and support for people who have lost their house already, and resistance to debt as well, which I'll come to in a second. But for that, I think there are organisations out there. You know, Unite has a community arm that I think could be doing a lot more if it felt that it was within its remit, so it wasn't just a kind of sub arm of Unite the Union, the workplace-based union. There are other community organisations, other tenants unions, and I think it's about injecting a bit of that radicalism and agitation into those spaces, so that they don't just become NGOs or support networks, because those are perfectly compatible with capitalism. They just get things outsourced to them, and they're quietly in the corner try and resolve the problems created by governmental and capitalist decisions. And I don't think that's the long-term vision for our politics or achieving any kind of socialism. But I do think that, just finally, the risk of not doing this is that we see another incredibly deep crisis that is shouldered by us as workers, as the working class, and that in order to police that and control that, we just see a very large wave of policing, a large wave of state repression, so social services coming in to just tidy around the edges of the problems they've created, and leaving people essentially struggling for themselves. And that by getting involved in different forms, the workplace activism is crucial in preventing it getting to that stage. And then there's all these other forms of activism in the community, which I think can help deal with those problems, or resist the disempowerment of workers that follows large-scale unemployment. Yeah, just as a final point, if anyone wants to know more about what different types of eviction there are, then I'm happy to talk about that. But just briefly, the one I'm most scared of at the moment, which will affect people in the private and public housing sector, anyone who's renting is Section 8 evictions. So if you're in rent arrears for more than 2 months, your landlord can serve you an eviction notice without really a blink of, like, you know, of the eyelids of the council or anything. They can just kick you straight out. And obviously coronavirus has been going on for about 5 months now, and some people lost their job at the start. So we are going to see, as soon as that eviction ban is lifted, large scale attempts at eviction. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see landlords and estate agents try to stagger it out over a course of months to keep their own costs down. And during that, I think, time, there has been talk from Labour about Section 8 requiring revisions, like making it a longer period. But what Acorn and others have been trying to do is get local councils to enforce stricter, to hire more staff basically, and enforce stricter lines on those Section 8s, make sure they're all legal, make sure they all resist, try and get landlords to make other options first before they issue a Section 8. So there are kind of like reformist ways to approach that as well. But in the longer term, I think that's what we're looking at. If someone gets served a Section 8 eviction, that's going to be the mass type that comes about, and that's what we need to be talking about, resisting mostly, I think, here, for those particular tenants. Anyway, I think I'll come to a close there, but final point, there are lots of other things I didn't really cover in this because it was a really huge brief I was given. It was like, talk about everything else. So if anyone wants to contribute anything to this discussion that wasn't raised in either one, then that's really legit. And the final thing I wanted to say was just about debt. I think we haven't talked about it in this meeting much, but it's the field I'm kind of working in at the moment as a caseworker, supporting people in serious debt. And we are going to see a massive spike in consumer debt as people try and take out debts to pay for their rent and living costs that they've lost. There are lots of ways to resist debt, but from what I can see, no one's doing it in the UK, really. There are some law firms doing it, and then there's some charities directing you. Charities often paid for by moneylenders, by the way, directing you to certain easy methods of signing up to a plan, but it doesn't actually help you really. It just reduces your monthly payments for a little while. So if anybody is either in debt or interested in debt as a concept and wants to do something together, I've tried reaching out to some groups that look like they're doing something and no answers. So maybe they're not there anymore. So it would be really great if any comrades are interested in it to get in touch with me, because I'm really keen on working out what we can do in forms of debt resistance. I think it could be really creative. I can see an acorny sort of model for doing it, but I'd like to put it past some people. So please do get in touch if you are, or raise it now. I'd like to hear a discussion.